Today we're going to be talking about wisdom, and wisdom is interesting in its own right because most experts agree that wisdom is uniquely human, it can be learned, it increases with age, and that it can be measured. Though throughout this lecture we'll be talking about the difficulty in measuring wisdom. But you might also ask, why study wisdom as part of a positive psychology class? And the quick answer on that is that positive psychology is really focused on optimal human functioning, living a good life, not just what makes people feel happy. And pretty much for the last 2,500 years, almost all experts have agreed that some aspect of wisdom and becoming wiser is connected with a life that is well lived. So the big part of what we're going to talk about today is that there's really three major approaches to the study of wisdom, two of which are more empirical, and those are the ones we'll focus on. The first one is philosophical. We'll talk just very briefly about that, though the book does a great job of describing that a little bit more detail. The implicit approach to measuring wisdom and the explicit approach to measuring wisdom. Those terms may not be very helpful, so you may want to think about implicit theories as really focusing on what people conceive of as wisdom, or sort of folk theories of wisdom, what people would say a wise person is, whereas explicit theories are much more objective. They're actually trying to define what wisdom actually is and then give people a set of tasks that they actually have to perform in order to show that they are wise. So very quickly, the study of wisdom through sort of a philosophical tradition. If you really look at Plato and most of the writings by Plato and Aristotle, you'll really see that there's different types of wisdom. Searching for truth is sort of a type of wisdom that is found in one type of person. Very practical wisdom, being able to do things, get things done like you would expect statesmen and legislators to be able to do, and really understanding cause and effect from a scientific point of view. But the first part of wisdom that we're going to, or the first approach that we're going to focus on is the implicit approach. Now, I want to state that while there has been a dramatic increase in the study of wisdom over the last, say, 15 years, there still are very few studies comparatively on wisdom. So when we think about the implicit theories of wisdom, we're really looking at what we might call common sense theories or folk theories of wisdom, where we really try and ask people who is wise, and then determine what are the characteristics of people that are actually wise. So in this way, researchers are really focused on trying to understand how lay people perceive and define wisdom. The methodology for using a sort of an implicit approach in many ways is very simple. You can either evaluate how people describe wise individuals, or really the behaviors that they associate through wisdom, or you can just ask individuals to describe a wise person, and then use really relatively complicated sets of statistical procedures, multidimensional scaling, to try and uncover these different types of components, these sort of clusters of adjectives, if you want to think of it that way, that help simplify what people's responses are. So Clayton really did this work in the early 70s. So this would be really where we begin to see the implicit wisdom tradition start. Clayton asked hundreds of different participants from many different age groups to describe a wise person, and what she found were really three particular components of wisdom: an affective component, a reflexive component, and a cognitive component. So affective characteristics would say that a wise person is empathetic and compassionate. These are really related to moral principles. Reflective processes are really about intuition and introspection, really understanding our interpersonal perceptions. And then cognitive capabilities or capacities, which are really more associated with processing and knowledge, experience and intelligence, and different types of capacities such as that. Sternberg, who actually is one of the few researchers, has looked at both implicit and explicit approaches to understanding wisdom, asked numerous people, though in one study I want to focus in on, asked 50 adults to describe hypothetical individuals and basically how wise they were and how intelligent they were and how creative they were. And what he finds is that while there is overlap between all three of these constructs, there's really large overlap, at least in this adult population on the East Coast. There's really large overlap between intelligence and wisdom, or that very cognitive component that Clayton found earlier. Holliday and Chandler examined different types of descriptors that people attributed to individuals who were wise. They really identified 5 factors that really seem to underlie wisdom. However, the sort of attributes that were really judged to be most prototypical of a wise person were really this exceptional understanding of ordinary experience and the ability to have judgment and communication skills. So while there's other components, competence and social discretion, really it's this sort of exceptional understanding and judgment and communication skills that they found to be really what people thought of when they thought of a wise individual. Baltes analyzed actually historical writing, so instead of asking other individuals to describe a wise person, Paul Baltes looked at how people described individuals who were wise in previous written communications, and what he really finds is that wisdom was described as sort of well-intended, pure virtue, if you could think of it that way, sort of combining this sort of mind and virtue. It's very difficult to achieve in some sort of ways if you look at people's writings, but it's really easy to recognize, which is probably why the implicit theories would ask people just to describe a wise person. And what I think is really important is that it involves special or superior knowledge, and this is something that's different than other theories that look at sort of just extraordinary knowledge. But superior knowledge and judgment and the ability to give advice. And at the end of this lecture, we'll talk a little bit about the role of mentorship in theories of wisdom. We'll sort of end by talking about some differences across cultures. Again, when we think of culture, we don't want to just think of Westerners and Easterners, though that's really what this slide will focus in on. But there are differences in implicit theories of wisdom across culture. If you were to ask individuals from different geographic locations to describe a wise individual, essentially you'll hear different types of descriptions. So probably the biggest difference is that Westerners really value or define a wise person based on their cognition, their intelligence, their problem solving, and their planning. Whereas Easterners really value or define a wise person based on more of these affective types of components. Their altruism, their empathy, their ability to see what needs to be done interpersonally and emotionally and compassionately, and actually to sort of bring that about. So what we're going to transition into, and really quickly, is that there are very few studies that really look at explicit theories of wisdom. When we talk about explicit theories of wisdom, it's not this implicit idea of what people think of as a wise person, but actually somewhat objectively trying to look at behavioral manifestations of wisdom. So in this way, we can really see here at the end of this first half of this lecture the difference between the implicit theory approach and the explicit theory approach. So in the implicit theory approach, you're really focusing on trying to listen to how people describe a wise person, whereas an explicit theory approach is really trying to specify what the sort of components of wisdom are. What is a wise person? How is it manifested in our life? And then ultimately, how is that related to different types of positive aspects?